Hey guys, my name's Hannah Perky. I'm CEO of Evelo team with Keller Realty, and I'm joined by Bob Warner, one of our most senior realtor partners here. And we're going to talk about what's been happening in the real estate market in the month of May. So, Bob, if you can get us started, can you tell us what happened locally here?
Yeah, let's just get going. We've been doing this for quite a while, so a lot of the same information just updated each month. First up is that median sales price. So we ended the month of May at 321, which was up just a little under 2% compared to last year. So we seem to still be in that roughly 2 to 3% growth rate, which is kind of what was anticipated for our market this year. Next up is that median days on market. So we ended May with 12 percentage wise. That looks like a pretty big jump over last year at a 20% growth. But again, we went from 10 to 12. So you see these enormous peaks and valleys, right? So this is sort of what we would typically consider the slightly slower months in terms of overall sales in the winter, where we creeped over 30 this past year, but then back down to 12. So I think we sort of anticipated that. Next up is that month supply of inventory. So again, a balanced market is usually considered about a 4 to 5 month supply of inventory. So we've been operating right around 2 months supply of inventory, just a little bit over for quite a while. Again, we've had some peaks and valleys, but that's pretty consistent with where we were last year at this time. We were at 1.8 and 1.9 this month, so staying pretty consistent there. And then we like to take a look at that average list to sales price ratio again. So lots of factors that go into that. But right now, our average list to sales price ratio is 98.6. So still selling most homes for very close to list price. Some still selling over list price, which we always kind of talk about in the next set of data. But that was
Yeah.
pretty flat over last year as well.
Yeah, I do love though that first stat you shared about home prices increasing just under 2%. I was talking to someone the other day about renting versus buying for a lot of those first time home buyers. And I'm like, your money's still growing though, in a really big investment, right? If you're purchasing a home in the $300,000 range as a first time home buyer, lots of opportunity there. What additional items have you been following to track the shifting market?
Yeah, so some of those items we just sort of take a look at the active inventory first up. So we ended the month of May at just a little bit under 6,500 units. That is a little bit higher compared to last year, almost 12%, which equates to
Mhm.
about 800 units. So we've been consistently in that number though. Next up is that number of closed sales. So again, a lot of these numbers are pretty consistent year over year, right? Pretty flat across the border, close to flat. So we ended up just a little under 3,500, which was up a couple hundred units over last year. So more sales in the month of May than last year. And then that next up is the number of new listings, where we were at 4,289, which was down just a little bit over last year. And then that last one that I alluded to in the first batch of data, we always like to take a look at the total percent of listings that are still selling for over list price. Because again, things are very hyper local down to the
Yeah.
neighborhood level, the town, the school district, whatever you want to look at. So
Mhm.
this number's actually been back on the rise. It is down a little bit from last year, but just under 20% of the homes sold over list price in May, which when you sort of extrapolate that out, that means like 1 out of every 5 home sales is still selling for over list price. So down significantly from when that number was like greater than 50%. 2 or 3 years
Yep.
ago. But we had seen that number go down as far as like 10, 11% over the last few months. So again, the summer season will always be the largest volume of sales, most likely in our market. And so we're sort of seeing that May data line up with what we would anticipate on a yearly basis.
Well, and I liked what you said about hyperlocal. So if you're watching this and we come to a listing appointment, that's what we would be really narrowing down for you because we see some pockets where I would say there's next to none over list price, and then other areas where we're like, yeah, 70 to 80% of them are going at over list price, and some of that's like Bob said, location, some of it's price point. So that's pieces we can help you narrow down if you're considering selling and really knowing what to expect in that. What about interest rates? What are we seeing with that right now?
Yeah, so this is another one that for the last few months has stayed pretty stable. We did get down into the very low sixes, high fives earlier in the year.
Mhm.
And then some of the worldwide geopolitical events have sort of made those creep back up a little bit. We've predominantly been fluctuating in that probably 6.25 to 6.75. This past week, that number ended at 6.48. That was up 0.12% from when we did this presentation last month. So we went from 6.32 to 6.48. Obviously, those things fluctuate on a daily basis, a weekly basis. There's a lot that goes into it. But at a minimum, this is a good sort of data point to look at each month, just sort of a threshold number of sort of what the average is across the board. We
Mhm.
seem to be sort of, I don't want to use the word stuck, but stabilized in that roughly 6.5%. When I see those numbers come from different lender partners from week to week to week, we
Mhm.
seem to be staying pretty close to that.
Yeah, and one thing we don't talk a lot about on this call that might be valuable if you're considering buying is new construction. A lot of the incentives right now is in buying down the interest rate, which can make a big difference in your monthly payments. So that's something we can share about if you have interest in learning about that and what that looks like. But that's some ways to offset those current interest rates that, like Bob said, have been pretty stable, and we don't expect to see huge swings in right now. Any final thoughts about state of the market?
Yeah, this one's maybe a little bit different than sometimes what we share, but I saw this come across my desk and thought it was interesting. It's sort of the 10 most affordable states, and that's based on housing costs as a percentage of median household income. And, we typically see Indiana, and in particular Central Indiana, typically
Mhm.
makes these lists, but it's just sort of good to actually see the data points. So Indiana came in as seventh on the list, and that's just a reminder, right? Even though it's not necessarily about like giving up on the home ownership dream, right? Sometimes it's maybe just about expanding the search. Someone from out of state could be watching this and maybe they've seen this list, would obviously love to get you introduced to Indiana and talk about our market. But then the other thing too is sometimes just going maybe a little bit outside of where you might think your ideal sort of geographic location is can open up some more opportunities for affordability. So think the key message there is don't feel because prices are increasing and interest rates are where they are that doesn't mean that housing is not still affordable here. Obviously, big picture data wise, it is still one of the 10 most affordable states in the entire country. And then even within that, we can probably help find pockets that might be near or close to your preferred geographic location. If for some reason your main geographic location is maybe a little bit outside of the budget, we can probably help find something close by that'll help bring that in
Yeah.
a bit.
Absolutely. Love it. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can throw them in the comments here and we'll get back to you on those. And if you want some individualized information on the stats, we'd love to meet about that. And we appreciate it. And hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Thanks so much. Bye bye.